This is the fourth video in my M52 rebuild series. If you haven't seen the preceding videos, check them out. With the block primed and painted, the next logical step was to install the crank. But before I did that, I had to, of course, inspect it and measure it so that I could order bearing shells. My machinist wound up polishing all of the journals of the crank to a what I would call a matte mirror finish. He achieved this finish using a worn 400 grit belt, and so he said he had to take off very little material to achieve this, which is kind of what I expected. But unfortunately, because I didn't mic the crank beforehand, I don't really know how much material he removed and how much was removed as a simple matter of the wear associated with 270,000 miles. Although my machinist did actually give me some incorrect data and kind of steer me down the wrong path, I ultimately measured the crank myself and figured out the correct bearing shells to purchase and install the crank with no issue. I thought it would be interesting to look at a close-up of the rear crank flange. That shiny area you see along the circumference of the flange is actually a polishing effect caused by contact with the rear main seal. When I first removed the crank from the block, I checked this area with the fingernail test and quickly concluded that it was nothing of concern. My machinist eventually concurred with that opinion and said that there was no point in polishing that, so that was reinstalled as is. I purchased a set of eye-gauging digital micrometers for this task, and overall I have to say that I was impressed with them. They certainly made life a lot easier than any analog micrometer would have, but I did find that these things just love to eat batteries. As I began to use this particular mic for the first time, I had to replace the battery in it because when I first started to take measurements with it, I noticed that the digital encoder was starting to kind of freak out and just measure inaccurately relative to the mechanical aspect of the tool, meaning the markings on the speeder, etc. So I had to replace the battery, and when you replace the battery in these units, you have to recalibrate them. Fortunately, the calibration process on a digital micrometer is very easy because all you're really doing is zeroing the encoder. This happens to be a 1 to 2 inch micrometer, so it came with a 1 inch standard, which of course I've inserted. And I'm attempting to take a measurement by tightening the speeder until it clicked one time, and that achieves a perfect clamping force. After the measurement's taken, I just had to press and hold the button to reset the encoder to 0. And with that calibration procedure complete, the unit's ready for service. Well, before I pulled the engine, I came up with a spreadsheet that would assist me in recording all the data from this process. The goal was to collect a total of 6 measurements from each journal, 3 in the vertical and 3 in the horizontal. Most engine builders seem to only collect 1 or 2 measurements during this process, but I decided to take the extra measurements to characterize not only the overall dimensions, but the shape of the journal. Now, as it turns out, the anvil on my micrometer was roughly 1/3 of the width of the journal, so by simply sliding the mic over and taking additional measurements, I could quickly determine whether or not the journal was perfectly flat across, or maybe had kind of a linear taper from one side to the other, or was actually crowned or maybe cupped a little bit. Using this technique, I eventually figured out that all of my mains were as flat as a board, but several of my rod journals were in fact tapered. This turned out to be pretty consistent with the state of the original bearings. I found the mains were worn a little bit, but the wear was very consistent across the bearing. But several of the rod bearings had a noticeable taper to the wear, meaning one side of the bearing was worn more than the other. Now, I have to admit, I was glad to learn this, and I'm glad I went through this process and figured this out. But it was like rubbing salt on an open wound because, unfortunately, if I had known this ahead of time, if I had taken measurements of the crank, if I had mic'd my crank before sending it to the machinist, I would have had this information. And I would have been able to tell my machinist, hey, rod journals 2, 3, and 4 are a little high on the right side or left side, and could you try to polish those sides down a little bit? But because I didn't have that data, I couldn't give those recommendations to him. So unfortunately, what this meant is that I had to reinstall the crank with the taper on those rod journals, but I'm sure it'll be fine. It just will wear the bearings over time in the same kind of tapered pattern as the original bearings had worn. While I waited for my bearings to come in, I decided to tackle a few essential tasks, including weighing my rods and pistons so I could produce a matched set. If you look closely at the bottom end of the rod, you can see that it's been filed down a little bit, and that's because my machinist already tackled the challenge in this process. He actually matched all the rods, weighed everything, and then of course he also weighed my pistons, and on delivery he gave me all of that data. Now I suppose a normal person would have just taken that data at face value and produced the match set from that. But you have to understand at this point, having learned that he gave me kind of misleading data with regard to my main bearings, I really didn't have a lot of faith in the guy at this point. So I decided to buy a scale and attempt to duplicate his results. In the end, I actually did wind up duplicating his data, so even though there was a little bit of an absolute error in the measurements that I took relative to his, the end result was the same. I was able to produce the match set from that data and produce a set of rods and pistons that were within 1 gram of each other. Before I started the assembly of the rods and pistons, I laid them out on the table, assigning the lightest rod to the heaviest piston and working my way down the weights to produce a set that matched to within 1 gram. BMW requires this set to be matched to within 8 grams, so I far exceeded that requirement. The process of actually mating these parts is fairly straightforward, but can be a little messy. I wound up putting assembly lube on all the mating surfaces, the pin bores, the bushing, and even the wrist pin. But because of the tight clearances involved, I actually found that most of the assembly lube just wiped off as I mated the parts. There wasn't much I could do about that, but I think it's fair to say that I left enough of a film on there to protect the parts during first start. Although I was really eager to start this process because of its symbolic nature. I mean, it made me really feel like the engine was finally coming together. There was one aspect of this that I was not looking forward to, and that was the installation of the wrist pin circlips. These clips are kind of a pain to install, so several companies now actually produce special tools to make this a lot easier. The tool I'm using is the Stomsky Racing Circlip Injector, and even though this tool isn't cheap, in retrospect I can say it probably saved me at least an hour or two of aggravation and maybe even a tetanus shot. Of course, that's not to suggest that the tool is completely foolproof or doesn't require any experience to use properly. My first attempt to install a circlip with it actually failed in that the circlip wasn't fully inserted into the bore. And I later figured out this was because that I didn't actually push the circlip out far enough and then rotate it just to the right angle. So I quickly picked that technique up, and once I did, it was very easy to use. Using the tool, it took me about a half hour to assemble all the rods and pistons. And I'm sure a pro could have done it, with a screwdriver in 1/10 of the time. But for a first timer like me, it was definitely the best choice. Here you can see I'm about to insert the clip into this pin bore, and you can see there's a little area cut out in the piston, and that's used to extract the circlip once it's installed. And I just put the open end of the circlip opposite that, press the tool, and it snapped right into place. It's important to note that JE specifically requires that the circlips be checked to ensure that they are actually inserted properly. And the way you do this is with a brass drift, and I'm just hitting it with a hammer. You can either hit it with anything really, but the goal here was to actually try to force the pin out the other side. So when I was actually hitting that drift, I was actually testing the circlip on the bottom of the piston. So of course I repeated the process for the other circlip and indeed all the circlips to make sure that they were fully seated. If you look carefully, you can see some numbers punched into the side of the rod and cap. Those numbers need to face the exhaust side of the block, so I naturally oriented each piston such that its exhaust valve reliefs were on the same side as those numbers. Identifying the exhaust valve reliefs on a factory Molle piston is very easy because they're tiny as compared to the intake valve reliefs. The exhaust valve reliefs on these JE pistons, though, are much larger, and in fact they're almost as big as the intake valve reliefs. So while I was able to very clearly identify them, I had to do a double and triple check just to make sure I was assembling them correctly. To wrap up this rod assembly, I figured I would show you the installation of the second circlip and take you through it with a little bit more detail. To load the circlip in the sleeve, I'm using this panel removal tool. I've had my toolbox for quite some time. Stomsky Racing suggests repurposing a screwdriver by kind of gouging the end of it, but obviously I didn't need to do that in this case. And I found that this tool worked just as well. And at the risk of annoying the copyright Nazis, I figured I would open the audio on this clip long enough to let you hear the sound of a circlip being injected. Before I put the finished rod assembly in a bag for safekeeping, I just did a general cleanup and inspection, and the all-important double check to ensure that the exhaust valve reliefs are actually oriented on the same side as those numbers on the rod. Before I could install the bearings in the block, I had to clean the oil squirters. Since these are not really cleanable in the usual sense, you can't get inside them to clean them, and I wanted to remove as much of the oil, gunk, and grime and varnish as possible, I just put them in a small can of mineral spirits overnight and then came back to blow them out with compressed air. I was careful not to overdo this because these appear to be made of some kind of lightweight metal like brass, and I didn't want to risk that check ball spinning rapidly and potentially wearing the seat against which it seals. Like every other part in this build, I briefly considered just replacing them for good measure, but when I learned that these were about $30 a piece, I said, well, I think I'll clean them instead. Just before I installed the oil squirters, I took this opportunity to do some last-minute cleaning with compressed air. Interestingly, as I blew compressed air into the holes on the right side of the bearing, I got a shot of air in the face because those tubes leading up the side of the block are the oil galleries for the mains. The M52, of course, differs from the M54 in a couple of major ways, one of which is the oil squirter design. On the M54, the oil squirters attach to the base of the cylinders and get their supply of oil from a gallery that runs the length of the block. The M52 squirters, on the other hand, are actually installed into a hole that's been drilled into the mains at an angle. While these squirters certainly do the job, they're a little less cut and dry to install than those of the M54. When I first tried to install them dry, after being cleaned with mineral spirits, they really didn't want to seat fully in the bore. Of course, I solved the problem by putting a little bit of engine oil in the bores and then trying to push them in, but they still remained a little bit tight. And because they're made of a soft metal, I didn't feel comfortable using any kind of mechanical means to press them into the bores, so I just wound up pulling them out and reinserting them until they fit. Around this point in the project, I learned from my parts rep at my dealer that out of all of the bearing shells that I ordered, one was tied up in Germany, so it would be about a week before I would receive it. So I had to put the crank installation aside and move on to other things. I figured the next step was to set my ring end gaps, but before I did that, I wanted to make sure the cylinders were absolutely clean. As you may recall, I pressure washed the block with mineral spirits, but that doesn't typically remove all of the grit and grime that finds its way into the cylinder walls during the honing process. So I naturally grabbed some blue towels and laced them with mineral spirits, and basically just kept cleaning the cylinders much as I'm doing right now until the towels came out clean. I then wrapped up the process by applying a thin film of oil to the cylinders to prevent rust. I knew that in order to set the ring gaps properly, I'd need a ring squaring tool. So I made this one out of an old piston and a compression ring installed in the oil ring groove.